Yeah, so my name is Tobias. Actually, it is Tobias because I am from Denmark. So if I have any fellow Scandinavians here, please yell, woo! Okay. Um, I work at Blackboard Insurance. I'll quickly go over what Blackboard Insurance does. But I think what I wanted to just say here is that I think I'm a person who's obsessed with trying to figure out how can we use design thinking to solve real world problems. So I, not because I want to offend anyone in e-commerce, but I think sometimes being in e-commerce can sometimes be a little too focused on conversion, and I'm very focused on how do we take a very real problem, which, for example, is insurance, where we have people who want to protect their stuff, and they're basically anxious all the time, and how do we kind of create an experience that's good for them, and kind of just improve that overall experience for them as well. So I am from Blackboard Insurance, and what Blackboard does is that we try to kind of take this really bad experience of insurance and try to say, how can we make that a lot better by making it, first of all, customer-centric, but also making it super value-driven and also data-centric as well. So trying to say, because we can get all this data out there, it's all available for us through a lot of different vendors, but how can we use it in a way where we can optimize our own workflows, but also the customers as well. So it's we work with commercial insurance, meaning we give insurance for businesses. So we're not one of Lemonade or the other personal lines, but we try to do the same thing in the commercial space. So today I'll be talking about understanding your customer and specifically on needs. I think it's an important subject to talk about. We typically get into a phase where we think we know what the customer needs, but we don't really know how to prioritize them, categorize them, operationalize them, all this stuff. So that's what I want to go over and see if we can kind of get to a point where people know how to include needs in their work. So I'll be over the why, the what, and the how. So meaning, why is it important to look at needs? What are needs specifically for emotional and functional needs? And how can you hopefully leave this room and kind of implement it in your own organization? So before we get started, let's talk about needs versus wants. I think most of you people, because you are in the product world, you know that if you only focus on what the customer wants, you won't probably get to a point where you actually deliver the most value. So the challenge for us is to figure out what is it that the customer needs, and what is it that we can do to identify that need and design for that need and develop for that need, and not just listen to whatever they want and build whatever that feature is. So I think we've all been in a situation where you're told to build a button or put something here or put some piece of content there, but you don't really know why that is important. Does that even stem from a need? So I think that's why this talk is going to be about how do you identify that need instead of just listening to that one. And another point I wanted to make about this is that when we focus on needs, I think it can get complicated to figure out what is actually a good need to focus on. So because needs are very contextual, first of all, so there will always be a different need for a different thing depending on what time of day it is, what context you're in. Like I probably will drink a beer when I'm off work, but I won't drink a beer when I wake up in the morning. So I have a different need depending on, I still want a beer eventually, but I don't want a beer in the morning, right? So the needs are very fluctuating and contextual. They're also very individual and kind of hard to generalize as well. So hopefully we'll get a little more clarity on that. Oh, that's great. So the idea is for these lines to be up there, just FYI. So when we look at a user story like this one, we have the so that over here in the corner, right? And basically what this user story allows us to do is to say, well, we are building features because of a need out there. I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but sometimes you can get to a point where it's really hard to identify that so that, or you know why this is super important to implement. So you just end up spinning out something that's maybe not even a real need, but just something you think would be a good need for the customer. So hopefully by today I'll also have more of a tool to put in what is that statement out there. So so you actually have a better idea of why is it you're building the features you're building. So generally, we need better tools to be able to actually design our products around the needs. And I think I've reiterated that point many times. So who here knows about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Okay. I'm not going to bore you with that. I think what is an important point about this one is that basically what he finds is that human beings have needs that are in different places in the hierarchy, meaning you have more foundational needs and you have more, what can you say, icing on the cake needs, if that makes sense. So the basic need for the human being is in the triangle, but at the bottom you have sleep and whatever else you need, and at the top you have more like self-esteem and control, so which are a little bit more soft values. I think the very important thing about this is that needs are very hierarchical and they're very, again, contextual. And that's why for product development, this becomes really relevant. So let me show you. So in product development, we're talking about two categories of needs. We're talking about emotional and functional needs. What that means is that you need the functional needs to kind of be there present or to be taken care of in the product before you can start focusing on the emotional needs. However, if you only focus on the functional needs, you'll get to a place where it's kind of hard to differentiate yourself from other competitors as well. So why is it that Lyft outperforms Uber? Well, the functional is kind of taken care of by both of them, but maybe Lyft or Uber are focusing on different emotional values, which is what actually makes the difference in how they are perceived by the customers. So if we look at values in the insurance domain that you see up here, you can kind of see, trust, aesthetics, reduces anxiety. It's reputable, meaning that the company is actually a good company that you want to buy from. You have cost-effective, efficient, informational, reliable. But once you actually start looking at them, you have a very distinct categorization of emotional and functional needs, which I think is very important to keep in mind, is that people would not want to buy insurance if we didn't have these foundational elements, but this is up here where we actually can differentiate the insurance product for the customers. So I just wanted to give that high-level overview of why is it that the needs are important to focus on. Just going to take a sip of water. So the challenge that I'm putting out here today is how do we identify, operationalize, and measure these customer needs? And if we look at a design process, David and I were talking about visualizing design processes can be in many different ways, but the general idea is that you want to make sure that you have a phase where you're doing your research, you're defining whatever you got from that research into some kind of problem statement. You're taking that and ideating it and opening up this space for that, and then you're kind of going down and saying what is it that eventually that's going to be the prototype delivering the value. So this double diamond approach. And what I want to say is customer needs should be in each and every phase of this. So make sure that whenever, and by the way, in each phase in this process is good for each thing that I want to talk about. So you have identifying the needs here, you have operationalizing them once you've defined them, and then you have measuring them at the end. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, more specifically. So how do we identify the customer needs? So identifying the customer needs should definitely be done, obviously, in research, right? Because this is where you get a chance to ask the customers questions about their experiences with your product or service. This is where you get to collect or send out surveys. This is where maybe some of you out there use consultants or whatever to gather these research insights. However, what is important in this process is that you keep it outcome focused, and I'll go over what an outcome focus means. But the idea is that you want to gather information to the extent that you know what is it that the need is from the customer that you can try to deal with and develop products around. And then I'm going to go over how do you then define this need in a statement that you can use for the later process. So I'm going to be talking about customer outcome statements today. I think if people know about jobs to be done or other theories trying to frame what is it that the job is that the customer wants to get done, you'll see some familiarity in this. But the idea is that we have a customer outcome statement that is a very concise, precise way of describing what is it that we need to deliver to the customer for them to actually get the right value, and then how do we use that in the process. So the way we do that is, let's see, that turned out to be a little ugly as well. So basically what the idea is that and we've modified the jobs to be done statement a little bit as well. So what we do is that we go down and we say, what is the context that the user is in or the customer is in whenever they're experiencing something? So let's say, I'll give a very concrete example from claims in insurance. So we have a specific context where the user, the customer wants to do something, they have some kind of action to get to some kind of objective. Let me see if I can. So in this case, before a loss happens for the customer, they want to maximize their ability to protect their assets. Makes sense, right? This is whatever they can do in their specific situation, whatever they can do to maximize their ability to protect their assets will make sure that they don't get a claim, which means that they won't have a loss, and that's the best for everyone, right? So this is an example of saying so instead of saying, oh, customers want to have an easy way to understand how to not get losses, we actually want to go a step back and say, but really what they want to achieve is they want to maximize their ability to protect their assets. And after this process, after you've started synthesizing all your research insights, you can actually get to a point where, so at the top we have the journey, right? You have before loss occurs, claim is processed, claim is settled, and you go back to normal as a customer. And then within each of these contexts or stages in the process, you have the statement. So maximize ability to protect assets, right, in the before loss up there. So, but you also have when you go back to normal, you want to maximize future loss prevention. Or maybe when the claim is being processed, you want to maximize knowing where the claim is. So hopefully what's clear here is that these are all specific needs that are not necessarily describing a want or a feature, but more what is it that the customer wants in this given context. And from looking at it from like a functional and emotional need, you suddenly see, oh, you know what? Some of them are actually more functional. So minimize number of steps to complete is very functional, whereas the minimize anxiety and uncertainty of outcome is more emotional. So this is about anxiety and making sure that we as a company can make sure that the customer is not anxious, whereas this is more about making the process more efficient and making sure that whatever claim has been processed is actually being processed with the least amount of steps, right? And when you start mapping it out, you'll see, well, some of them are actually functional, some of them are actually emotional. And what this hopefully allows you to do is to prioritize and say, you know what, we have to make sure that at least these functional needs are taken care of, and then we'll focus on the more emotional needs after. So how do we then operationalize these? So now we're talking about a point where we've done the research, we've defined what are the outcome statements, what are the outcomes that we want to achieve for the customer, and now we're going to go into this ideation phase of saying how do we carry that through and make sure that whatever design activities we're doing are sticking to that need that we observed. We also want to make sure that when we start prototyping and when we start picking out solutions, that whatever we're deciding on is going to be the most valuable to the customer. This is great. So imagine that line is up on top. So I found it very useful too. So once you have the customer outcome statements, I'm not sure how many people of you guys have used the how might we for like a design ideation session before. And what you'll find is that these customer outcome statements are actually perfect for a how might we. So let's say the example we had before, how might we help the customer maximize their ability to protect their assets, is a very specific problem without being too focused on the solution. So this actually allows for brainstorming on how can we make sure that the customer knows how to protect their assets. Again, we're not talking about an app, we're not talking about notifications, we're not talking about a website, whatever. We're talking about what is that need that we know that the customer has, and how can we design solutions for that. And eventually, so this looks a little better actually. So eventually you can get to a point where you have the entire customer journey mapped out. And as you'll see at the top, you can have a guiding customer outcome statement that kind of defines whatever solutions you end up on, right? So down here you can say, maximize ability to protect assets. Okay, that ended up being a claims prevention notifications that are contextual for the customer. Well, now we know at least whatever feature we ended up delivering, this is whatever need that we hope that we're going to satisfy. And that's the same thing for the rest of the process. So always saying, we're not going to have a random feature release. We're not going to randomly deploy something and hope that it's going to deliver value, but you need to have a specific objective in mind or outcome in mind whenever you ship that, so you can see the value, measure the value. So speaking of measurement, before I get into this, obviously, measuring can be done in many different ways. I think both qualitatively and quantitatively. I want to show you guys the way that I found that customer outcome statements can be used in a quantitative way in surveys. So that's what I'm going to be going through. So again, now we're at this point in the process where, again, we're trying to still focus on the needs in the process, and now after the prototype has been made, or maybe even after the product has been shipped, we're now ready to measure if we actually achieved the outcome that we wanted to achieve. So in this one, you'll see that here we have the solution, helps, and then we have the customer outcome statement. Let me show what that could look like. So the claims prevention notification helps maximize my ability to protect my assets. So what this does is that basically it describes, hopefully, whatever value you want to deliver to whatever need that the customer has and whatever solution you've developed. If you start putting that into a survey, and let's say you use a Likert scale like this one, you can actually ask them, so to what extent do you agree with the following statement? And you can see if the customer actually agrees with the fact that you've met that need that they had, right? And then let's say in the beginning, when you first ship off the product, or maybe even before you ship the newest product that you're looking at, maybe you get a very strongly disagree. That's fine. But then you know that to measure the success of whatever need you wanted to design for, you would see hopefully a better score down there. So whatever I wanted to talk about today was customer needs are, first of all, emotional and functional, and I hope you guys see that as a clear distinction. It's something you can also read about online, but I think ideally think about whenever you get a sense of a customer need, think about, is this actually functional or is this actually emotional? Functional being the more basic need that you have to solve for first, but doesn't really provide any value in itself. And then you have the more emotional need after. That's probably going to differentiate yourself from the competitors. So the key takeaways are we need better tools for identifying needs, and we just don't just listen to wants. And I think maybe the point I tried to make here as well is remember that it is important that you focus on the needs and not just on the wants that you're constantly getting from people who have requirements for you. Also, customer needs are hierarchical, and they're both functional and emotional character. We can organize and operationalize the customer needs in what we call the customer outcome statements. And then, ideally, this method actually allows for finding solutions and measuring success grounded in the customer needs. So hopefully that should be clear by now, that whenever you can distill the customer need into a sentence, and you can use it throughout the entire process, you actually have a much more grounded solution that's not just pulled out of thin air, but actually specified in a specific customer need. So that's it. Time for questions.